Hello and welcome to the first Magicbricks Dialogues, where I, Siddhart Goel, the head of research and editorial for Magicbricks, I'm going to host you for this webinar titled, Is this the right time for NRIs to invest in Indian real estate? Today's session is divided into three main sessions. A brief overview of how Indian markets performed in Q1 vis-a-vis other quarters in 2021. This will be followed by a panel discussion of about 20 to 25 minutes with our esteemed guests. And finally, we will spend the last 25 to 30 minutes in answering questions that you, our audience, have shared with us. Starting off with the introductions of the panelists, Mr. Alakto Majumder is a partner at AGMS and Company, a firm of chartered accountants. He has 3 decades of experience working in different segments of finance, audit, and taxation. He has also worked extensively with the advisory group on GST formed by the Government of India in December 2017. Secondly, we have with us Advocate Atulay Nehra. Mr. Nehra is a practicing advocate in the Supreme Court of India, Delhi High Court, and subordinate courts. He has a postgraduate degree in political science and business administration and is a qualified law graduate with extensive experience as a legal and real estate investment consultant. He is also the founder of Atulay Nehra Consulting. So without much ado, let me first start off with the overview. Given the COVID pandemic, the impact that most of us are aware that it had on the real estate sector was largely, one where in the initial year there was basically a dip. But what we have seen in the last quarter, the quarter that just went by, overall all parameters, that is in terms of demand, supply, prices, we have seen an uptick. Our data, as you can see, shows that the total number of searches in the cities that we track, and we track 13 cities, as you can see the list on the screen. At an aggregate level, at an India level, the demand of searches, and this is on the Magicbricks website, increased by nearly 4.5% quarter on quarter and nearly 7% year on year. Listings, of course, remain stable for most of the quarter, but on an annualized basis, they grew by 4.7%. One of the important things to see the health of any market is to also understand whether there are any kind of price movements, especially if they're slightly moving up. Of course, we don't want runaway increases in prices, but small incremental growth definitely assures people about a market, the health of its market. And what we've seen is that prices in the under construction segment, as well as those which were ready to move and in resale markets, have increased over the last quarter and definitely on a year-on-year basis. So these are typically the indicators and parameters that people investing in Indian housing markets or developers or any other stakeholders would be looking at to understand how the markets are doing. Now, on a quarterly basis, what we can see is that definitely is that there was growth in the last quarter, and what is important to understand is that in the last quarter, what we had seen is that the third wave had started showing its impact just in December, and we started off January on a muted basis. And once it was apparent that the third wave is not going to have the same impact that the devastating impact that we had seen in the second wave last year, that things started moving up in February and March. And that's why there were positive indicators for the housing markets. To understand more in terms of how this performed over the last 5 quarters, the two graphs that you can see show you the demand and supply that Magicbricks data has tracked. And what you can see that where demand is concerned, the demand saw spikes moving up, going up, or trows which demand falling, basis the different waves that we could see that were going on. So, for example, last year, we had just we moved in. The second wave came in, and that's when you could see that demand had slowed down. By the third quarter, restrictions had started moving out, were being eased by various governments. Most people could enjoy greater mobility. and that's when people, demand started going up because people started going out to look for homes and transact them. So that's why the third quarter showed an improvement in demand. This was expected to carry on into the fourth quarter also, because given that it's a festive season, a lot of developers were launching new projects. However, because the third wave, we had started feeling the impact already. That's why towards by December, the demand started muting and had an overall impact, as you can see. And I've already mentioned that quarter one of 2022 showed positive demand, because we could see that the third wave was not going to have the impact that most people anticipated. So that is why the trends for demand showed that there were up and down movements on various quarters. However, supply didn't see the same kind of impact, because largely developers, what we've seen in the last couple of years, what they have done is they've not launched many new projects. What they've been really focusing on is completing the under construction projects that they already have, handing them over, launching phases within the same projects, because a lot of these projects were large. So absolutely new projects were not brought into the supply. Most of the supply that you can see, which is denoted by these graphs, is largely resale and existing unsold inventory. And because of this, because these are already there in the market, it was the supply, the levels could be maintained all through. The trends that you see actually reflect what we had seen in the demand chart, because as demand went up, there we could see an impact on prices. Of course, one of the things that I'd like to mention out here is that a lot of this impact on prices was reflected more in the secondary markets or the resale markets, where primary sales were concerned, under construction projects or inventory being sold directly by developers. Most developers actually held on to their prices or even offered discounts to basically push the unsold inventory. And one of the main things was also is that various state governments had introduced incentives such as rebates in stamp duty and registration charges, and there were certain other incentives that were provided. So because of which, most developers could actually pass on benefits in primary sales. So what you're seeing is actually demand, that the price change that is getting reflected is more in the secondary markets. And this is where they follow the pattern of the demand and supply charts that we had seen. Finally, coming to our outlook for the balance quarters and what we see going forward, especially into the next year, is that based on the trends that we've been seeing in the last 2-3 quarters, it is expected that demand will continue to show a healthy and steady increase. This is especially because the economy is opening up as restrictions have been lifted. Many employees are now going back to offices, including in IT firms and other service firms. Educational institutions are opening up. So as a result, what we're also seeing is that a number of employees and families which had moved away from the tier 1 cities, especially the really large cities like Bombay, the NCR markets, or even Bangalore, and had moved back to their hometowns in tier 2, tier 3 cities, are now moving back into these major cities, and that's why demand is increasing. So this is also getting especially reflected in the rental markets, where we are steadily seeing that supply is decreasing, and there are signs that rental are also actually strengthening. In terms of the demand that is there for buying homes, what we see is that end user demand remains strong, especially in the affordable and mid segment, and this will continue because this is an underserved segment in the entire Indian housing markets. There was largely oversupply, especially even before the pandemic hit, in the premium and luxury segments, and this was a pretty huge overhang which had been created. And this is definitely, whilst it has been decreasing, it hasn't decreased to the levels where developers can confidently launch many more new projects, and where end user demand is going to increase, because most of that end user demand has already been met. the sales velocity that we've been seeing pre-pandemic in these segments was largely on for more for individual investors who were buying their second and third homes with the anticipation of being benefiting from capital value increases and making a profit out of that. So we don't expect much momentum to come in where demand is concerned for mid segment or for premium and luxury segments. And as a result, what we are also looking at is that a lot of investors, people who are buying properties, a second, third, or fourth property, mainly just to hold on, and then as soon as they see an appreciation, basically resell those units. That demand will remain lukewarm to warm. It won't go into the kind of phase that we'd seen pre-pandemic, especially in the years of around 2012 to 2014. That will still take a little time. Probably it could be anyone's guess, maybe from 6 months to a year later. So what we do expect is that developers will largely launch new projects coming in the next few quarters, targeted at mid and affordable segments, targeted at end users. And what we are definitely seeing as a healthy practice, which has happened during the pandemic, is that today a lot of end users are focusing on buying units with either established developers who've got great track records, or where the projects are nearing completion, because there is definitely more assuredness of the handovers. And that's why developers today, especially a lot of the smaller developers who are sitting on good land banks, are now signing up, the partnering with the large established developers, saying that we are the primary landowners, but you go ahead and execute these projects. So these are the trends that we typically would expect would happen in the demand and supply. Prices, our sense is that whilst we may see certain increases in certain markets across a city level or a pan-India level, the prices may not increase right away. In terms of where developers are pushing to increase their profitability. However, what we may see is that prices may increase a little because of the inflationary pressures that have been created due to raw material costs going up. And this is where developers who may not be able to absorb the price increases may have be forced to pass them on to buyers by increasing prices because of that. There is, of course, also an anticipation that the Reserve Bank of India may start increasing interest rates in the next few quarters to try and control inflation. But we expect that these increases will be gradual and they will not have a very huge impact on interest rates for housing loans, because of which typically we expect that end users who are still committed to buying their homes will still carry on and look at that. So that brings me, to the end of this brief overview to give a context of the kind of markets that we expect will, to witness in the next few quarters. With this, I would now like to, get into our panel discussion. So let me just start off with some, a common question to both of you, Mr. Majumder and Mr. Nehra. Where I would like you to, I would request you to first, if you can share your basic opening comments, especially talking about what you think are the major changes or any interesting changes or trends that you've seen in the last 12 months, especially, which have, affected your domain expertise vis-a-vis Indian housing markets. So if you can start off with you, Mr. Majumder.
See, when this pandemic has hit us, and it has hit us badly, that has also brought certain good things. For example, it has actually accelerated the automation. So therefore, what government has also done, and this we have seen both with GST and income tax, they have put this automation in full swing. GST, the way it has been rolled out, nothing can be done manually, and everything has to happen online. So therefore, whether you sit in Washington or whether you are there in Kerala doesn't make any difference, because if you have internet, If you have your login and password, you can operate from anywhere. What we have seen, what we have experienced in the last 1 year, that everything is happening so smoothly, it actually helps both ways. For the government, it helps because since they have automated, they know where to allot or allocate this particular work. So therefore, they are utilizing their resources well, and it has brought immense benefit to the taxpayers because they know this particular process is now so streamlined that it brings not only comfort and convenience but lot of transparency as well, because everything is now recorded, and therefore the authorities are also now almost bound to pass reasoned orders. It cannot be very arbitrary now. So from the taxation point of view, I believe this pandemic has brought that policy push, and it has moved full throttle on automating things, which is in my view is a great welcome step.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Nehra. Mr. Majumdar, I think, what the points that you brought out are not typically the kind of points that most people, whether, buyers in India or internationally, NRIs or PIOs would actually be hearing. So thank you for that. I think those are really interesting insights. Mr. Nehra, if I can request you to share any such interesting trends that you've noticed.
What all of us have went through in last 2.5 years, definitely it has affected the real estate market adversely. And the changes which has come to the market is the two perspective to it, from the investors or the buyers perspective, and then from the manufacturers, as in from the developers perspective. And then is where the government also comes into place. So what has happened in last 2.5 years, when all the projects stalled and nothing was moving, there is a push, or you can say there is a absolute rise in filing of RERA complaints. You would have seen there are a lot of developers who have actually landed up in the NCLT in bankruptcy proceedings. So definitely there was a time in last 12-15 months where there was a lack of trust in the market from the investors side, because every second developer was facing either the NCLT proceeding or have hundreds of complaints registered against them in the RERA authorities across India. But yes, considering the markets coming back, there are various projects which are coming in. There are various investment offers which are being given by the developers. But considering, as I said, considering last 24 months, considering especially the last 12 months, what has happened with the developers, the NCLT proceeding, the RERA proceeding, it is very, very important for any investor to check and double check their investments before even considering a particular project. The reasoning is simple, that if you do not have the history of the developer with you, whether they have completed any projects or not, what kind of litigations they are facing. So that is very, very important to understand. So is why we tell everyone today, if you are putting in even single penny, just study about the developer, just read about whether the developer has the land ownership, and then accordingly pursue.
Okay, so just in continuation to what you just said, in terms of especially checking the track records, making sure that the project that you're investing in, is above board.
Interestingly, at various stages, the project, the documentation may be different. So if I intend to invest in a project which is just on map, I should rather be focusing more on the documentation pertaining to ownership of the land by the seller, a developer who's proposing a project on a certain land. I should be knowing whether he actually owns the land to date or not, whether the land has been allotted or not, because these are the major issues. If it is a soft launch project, we are talking about the ownership of land with the developer. Then if the project is already under construction, whether product which is being sold, again, is it on map, whether the tower has been constructed or not? If yes, then what is the stage of construction? Because developer would more interested be taking wanting the money as down payment. Giving you some very lucrative offers and giving you discount that I'll give you 50 lakh products for 45 lakhs if you pay upfront. In such cases, the stage of construction need to be checked, and more importantly, the land document plus the stage of construction need to be checked. So if it is a resale of the same unit, then there would be transfer of builder buyer agreement. So the first owner would have signed a builder buyer agreement with the developer. Now, if I purchase this in a secondary market or from the first owner, then this builder buyer agreement need to be changed in the records of the developer's office. Then only when the registry will happen at a later stage, registry would be done in my favor. So again, as I said, various documents at various stages need to be checked. It is always better to get your documents or at least take a second opinion about the purchases which you are about to make in any of the project or independent house whatsoever.
The perspective that you brought in, that different stages require different kind of due diligence, I think that's an important one for any kind of buyer. So I think that's excellent, this thing. Coming back to you, Mr. Majumder, is there a restriction on the number of properties that an NRI can buy in India?
There are restrictions in terms of like agricultural property, plantation farm. So, but here primarily we are talking about these residential properties and office buildings, etc. So they can continue to buy all those.
Yeah, so any kind of built property, typically NRIs can buy, and there's no problem in the number of properties that they buy. But if they are looking at buying land, then they'll have to look at various state restrictions because, like Mr. Nehra pointed out, I think agricultural land, not every state allows anyone to buy. Either you need to be an agriculturalist yourself or you need to be domiciled in that state before you can actually buy, right?
That's right.
Great. So I think that definitely helps. Just moving on from that, another question that is there is, and I think this is an easy one, but probably there is some confusion about this, is that can NRIs take home loans from Indian banks?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. All Indian banks are interested in offering these home loans because if you look at how it works, the banks will give 85% possibly or 90% of the value of the property. So the balance 10-15% has to be brought in by the person who is buying, the NRI. So therefore, in the worst case, bank still has this property, the collateral with the bank. So therefore, all banks are interested in giving loans to NRI. However, this is subject to fulfillment of all specific conditions, giving 100 documents, etc. But at a broad level, yes, the banks give loans.
Okay. Can an NRI buy a property in partnership with someone else?
See, if you are buying it as a company, definitely you can buy. But when we talk about buying a property as a co-owner or as a joint holder, it is more, the properties are mostly bought as a if you are part of the family. So the registrar also sees where is the money coming from. So there are two different. So, for example, me or one of my friend may not be able to buy a flat in joint ownership.
Sure.
Pushing in two monies, because there would be issues in loan and many things if loan is taken. So generally, this is not entertained that two different people buy a property unless there is a partnership company.
The partnership firms are not allowed to acquire property in their own names. It's almost like a pass-through entity. So it has to be done in the name of the partners. So theoretically, 2 persons or 3 persons can actually join hands and buy a property.
Can NRIs use power of attorney to buy a property?
Oh yes, very much. Power of attorney can be given to a blood relative, any of the relative, a close friend, or any person with a legal, or you can say who's a licensed professional, as in can be a CA, can be an advocate, can be a registered real estate professional. It can be given. The only condition is if a NRI or a PIO is giving power of attorney. That power of attorney need to be registered, or you can say it need to be oathed in front of the oath commissioner at the concerned embassy in that country. And once that power of attorney is in India, then that document physically need to be sent back to India. Once it is there, it would be stamped in accordance to the state stamp law, and then it can be used as a power of attorney for transfer of property, or you can say purchase of property.
The next question, follow-up to that would be, is that what are the things that a domestic buyer should keep in mind when they're buying a property from an NRI?
If an NRI buys a property, certainly there are many things that need to be considered. A domestic buyer can buy a property from NRI under mainly two things. One, definitely the property should have been bought through all the legal channels. So and that can be very well proved with all the documents, the builder buyer agreement or the registries, whatever would be given at the time of such purchase. And the money that would be paid to the NRI, because in that NRI would any case would want to repatriate that money to his accounts or to his country. So that money need to be paid into a NRO account. As long as there is no there are no other understandings between the buyer and the seller.
So, Mr. Majumder, follow-up question to in continuation with this is that what are the different taxes that have to be paid by an NRI when they're selling a property in India?
The tax has two aspects. One is when the NRI sells a property, and I assume he sells at a price which is higher than his buying price. Therefore, he is making a gain. So the underlying assumption is if he bought at X dollar, he sells at Y dollar, where Y is greater than X. And therefore, he makes a gain out of it. So on this gain, he has to pay tax to India. Now, since he is an NRI, otherwise his all other incomes, his global income will not be taxed in India. But since this particular immovable property is situated in India, gains made out of it has to be taxed in India. India has the legitimate right to tax that. Now, what is interesting is when a resident sells a property, the government knows that finally he would file his income tax return, and therefore the buyer only has to deduct a tax of 1%. Why it is so low? Because here the government understands, since the seller is a resident, he is legally obligated to file his income tax return. So therefore he would disclose everything here and file the return. But this 1% helps government to know that this transaction has happened. So the information will actually flow from two sources. And this is also, we have seen the central government particularly, it is slowly moving away from assessment to verification. Because in assessment, what happens, it is one-to-one. But in verification, what happens, the information flows from multiple channels. And if you look at the way they are now configuring all those information, they are collecting information from the registrar, who is actually doing all this registration. They're collecting information from the bank. They're collecting information from the buyer, who is supposed to deduct 1% tax and pay to government. And finally, they also wait for the seller to declare this income and file his return. So at least from 4 sources, they are collecting information and they are corroborating. So therefore, A, it builds a whole lot of transparency. B, now every assessee, every taxpayer understands that government has actually, plucked all this information. So therefore, it's better to declare it. Because if someone doesn't even declare, then there could be penalty proceedings, for concealment of income, etc. Now, since the NRI doesn't stay in India, the definition itself very clearly says, his stay in India is quite restricted. If he doesn't file his return, how the government will protect his revenue?
Sure.
So, for a NRI seller, the buyer has to deduct this tax, this TDS or withholding tax, whatever we say, If the property is sold after 2 years, the buyer will deduct a tax of 20%.
Okay.
If the property is sold within 2 years, then the buyer will deduct a tax of 30%. Why is that? Because that is the tax in the hand of the NRI. So what government is trying to do, it is trying to protect its own money. The moment it is cut and paid to the government, then in case the seller actually doesn't file any return for some reason or other, the money of the government is protected because he has already collected the money. That's point number one. The point number two is this calculation. Now, when we say 20%, 30%, and we say this says, and the surcharge, etc., all these, the effective rate will go up. But on what value this has to be applied? Now, let us understand, when I said that X minus Y, the delta, the differential amount, which is the gain, the tax actually has to be paid on that. If my capital gain is $100, then I would pay the tax on $100 only. But how would the buyer know that what is the capital gain in the hand of the seller? So since the buyer doesn't know, so the buyer would actually try to withhold the tax on the entire sale, because he doesn't know what is the capital gain out of this transaction. He has no access to the seller's information. Then what happens? The seller knows that he is supposed to pay that 20% tax on his gain, but the buyer is deducting the 20% tax on the overall sale proceeds, which is a much higher amount. So what is the remedy then available to the seller? In that case, the seller can disclose all this information by filing a particular form, it's form 13, and request the jurisdictional income tax officer, absolutely online, to issue a lower tax deduction certificate. That income tax officer will actually look at all this information, and if he has reasons to believe that yes, while the property is being sold at say $100, the actual gain is only $20, and out of this $20, if 20% tax, then it comes to $4. So he may issue a lower tax deduction certificate saying cut only at 4% on the proceeds. So therefore, now the buyer has an official document. And why is this necessary? Because the Indian Act under section 271 capital C, it says that if the buyer makes a default in deducting this tax, then the responsibility is on the buyer to pay a penalty.
Okay.
So the buyer would always take a very conservative stance.
Correct.
So for the seller, it is much better, instead of directly telling the buyer, reduce this or whatever, because the buyer will not do. If it's informed buyer, he will not do. So therefore, it is much better for him to approach the income tax authority by filing all those forms and getting a lower tax deduction certificate, and then submitting it to the buyer saying this has now been officially acknowledged, so please deduct in this manner. So that will actually improve his cash flow. Finally, he has to pay tax. Correct. And as Atulay was saying, this eventually this issue of repatriation will also come in, because the money will flow somewhere else unless it is reinvested in India. So if it is repatriated, then again the banks will ask for two particular certificates called 15CA and 15CB, and those again have to be certified by a practicing chartered accountant. You declare what is the source and whether there is some kind of a double taxation avoidance agreement with that particular country where the NRI is based at, and then the money can be repatriated very easily.
Okay. So just a follow-up question to that: how much time does this process take? Especially to get that certificate from the local assessing authority, the income tax authority, to get the lower tax rate. Typically, how much time would this take?
If someone gives all the information, the documents, etc., then it should not take more than 1 to 2 weeks. It would come very quickly, provided if there are queries coming in, that has to be also responded fast.
Okay.
Then it will happen very quickly.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, please carry on. Okay.
And one more point on, as I'm picking up the cue from what Atulay was saying, that if it's an under construction property, one has to examine all those documents, etc. From a taxation point of view, see, tax is driven by government's policy.
Correct.
So and then it also signals what government wants. Now, if you look at the property, if it is resold, a complete property in all respect, if it is resold, there is no GST on it. When a property, even if the builder is selling, after getting the completion certificate from the authorities, then there is no GST on it. However, for any under construction property, the buyer also has to pay GST.
Correct.
So if you look at from that angle, possibly government also encourages the buyers to buy the property when it is otherwise complete and ready for occupation.
Yep.
Because he also gets all these tax advantages. So therefore, if you now combine all these inputs, it becomes almost risk-free if you buy a ready property. B, particularly for the NRI, since their stay in India is restricted, therefore they cannot be expected to have a close watch on whatever is happening on the ground. It might be safer for them actually to buy a property which is otherwise complete. And as I said, perhaps government also encourages that by saying in that case you don't have to pay any GST at all.
Okay. And just one question that I had, which came up in mind, is you said this whole process is now moved online. So
That's
that
right.
means an NRI basically sitting even in a country abroad can actually apply. It doesn't have to be physically present out here in India to actually do this whole documentation process.
Absolutely. He can file not only this particular form, he can file his return sitting at his home. And in case during the assessment, for whatever reason, he is unhappy, can prefer an appeal to the appellate authority absolutely online. He doesn't need to travel to India at all. Everything can happen from wherever he is.
Okay, I think that's an extremely important takeaway for our audience, because historically everyone's always been under the impression that you need to come to India. So I mean, I've seen friends and families saying that, okay, when they plan to come to India, they need to plan for extra days to take care of all these legal and taxation matters. And typically what you also find is that even when they hear, because of a variety of reasons, that work doesn't get done and there's all this pressure that gets built up. So I think that's an important takeaway, that, to avoid all this, you can actually do it from the convenience of your own homes in your own time. And the system works. It will deliver. Great. So thank you for that. Mr. Nehra, an important question that has come in is that what is the best place to invest in India and why? Would you have any perspectives on this?
See, this is a research-based question. I believe you are the best person to answer on that. However, when we talk about what would be the best place, see, investment, as far as I understand, investments are always a matter of choice and a matter of requirement. A person who actually hails from Punjab may not want to put their money in Kerala or Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu. The maximum he will stretch out is to Delhi or NCR. Or maybe with an intention that if I go back to India 5 year, 10 year down the line, I would work or I would start my business in Mumbai. So he may consider Maharashtra. So that is definitely as per a matter of choice. Considering the legal scenario today, considering the situation of the developers, respecting the NCLT and other proceedings which these developers are undergoing, I believe any developer, if it is purely investment, any company, any real estate company which has a track record, which has a clean track record, is what the investor should be choosing, rather than just looking into the product only. So because I would say that as of today, there are many products which are being launched across India which are still giving assured return assured rentals and whatnot, all starting from as low as 9% to 15% of assured rentals are even offered today. It would be surprising for many people that Reserve Bank of India in 2016 order has already declared all of this being an illegal practice.
Correct.
Because no one other than the banks, which Mr. Majumder can also vet, no one can other than banks can give you assured returns, or you can say a fixed return on your investment. However, 12% is being given or 15% is given. Interestingly, I am surprised on this that people actually end up making 100% payments or full investments just in lieu of those 12% returns which they intend to get or which they are promised to be given without any documentation. You buy a 2,500, 3,000 rupees shirt after looking at 50 options, and you 50 lakh rupees without even looking at the documentation. So that's quite surprising. So it is that better to invest in a company with a good track record rather than just closing your eyes and putting in your money.
No, I think what you've said is very pertinent, and I have experiences personally. So I have had people reach out to me saying that you are in research, you understand the market, and they've asked me to look at a proposal. And my piece of advice, similar to yours, has always been: is first and foremost, do not invest in a location which you are not comfortable with. So, like you mentioned, I've had friends call me up and ask me that they're from Mumbai, Pune. Can we invest in an interesting project in somewhere in North India? Because there is this guarantee of returns. And my answer to all of them has always been: never invest in a place which you cannot manage physically. Because every time you come to India, are you going to spend time and effort to go to that place, the other city, to where you don't know anyone, to understand what's happening to your property and how will you actually protect your interests? So first and foremost, don't look at another location which you're not comfortable, which cannot be managed very easily by you or your friends or your relatives. Secondly, like you said, focus on track records of developers, and invest in property that you're absolutely sure will be delivered. And thirdly, of course, is not to go for these assured return investments, because one doesn't know how they can pan out. So that this thing, but on a in continuation to that, in case an investor still goes ahead and makes this kind of investment, it goes into dispute. Can an NRI investor also approach RERA? Can his or her rights be protected? What are the options available to them?
See, RERA, as long as someone is not is a foreigner as in per se is not an Indian citizen altogether and not have roots, definitely the law would be different. However, otherwise, RERA does not differentiate between a person of Indian origin staying in anywhere overseas or staying in India. RERA is the first stepping stone. I would certainly like to clarify one very important thing here. This is in general per se. What has happened, Siddhart, over last few years since the RERA has come into place? Before RERA, there were various platforms where you could have gone and filed complaint. Even today, you can still approach multiple forums. However, after RERA has come, an investor need not to go to a consumer court, need not to go to a recovery court, may not be required to go to a criminal court, because wherever they go, the first question would be asked whether you've gone to RERA. RERA helped you or not. That is the first question that is asked. So that builder-buyer agreement kept in your Almirah will definitely not lay eggs there. You have to get that agreement brought into a legal forum. Just we need to understand, even if RERA has come today and says that any agreement which is done between the buyer and the seller has to be registered. So technically, agreement to sell has to be done. As soon as you register an agreement which intends to give you a property over few years is agreement to sell. So that need to be registered. But even today, properties are being sold on builder-buyer agreements. These builder-buyer agreements technically are contracts which are per se, they are not registered anywhere, right? It's a contract between you and me, you being buyer and me being the developer. That's it. So, as soon as we bring this builder buyer agreement in RERA, it becomes a valid document, valid document between yourself and me of a purchase. So that is where my purchase becomes legal, and that is where I can claim something from you on the basis of that agreement. Otherwise, that agreement is just a piece of paper while resting on my table. Correct? So RERA is the first place where someone should approach for a specific relief. But again, this someone need to understand at what stages I can approach. All stages except registration. After the registration has happened, after the CC, completion certificate, has been given to a project, then you cannot approach RERA.
Okay.
Or else, otherwise, anyone, NRI, Indian, they can approach RERA.
Okay. But isn't there a clause in RERA which says that even a project which is handed over for 5 years, the developer has a liability towards maintaining and resolving any kind of issues and all that come up? So if that is there, then if it's not under RERA, where does a buyer go?
Absolutely. When we talk about the guarantee of a project or guarantee of services post handover or registration, technically, I'm talking about the experience which we have faced in court. A person will come and say that I was promised so and so, registry has been done, possession has been given, but it's already been 3 years, the club has not been started.
Correct.
Or certain services have not been given.
Correct.
At that moment, we need to see that what RERA can do. RERA will maximum pass an order ki boss, please start your club certain time. There is no penalty per se on the services that were promised and not given. Okay. Because you are already paying a maintenance charge, then there is where the consumer court comes into place.
Okay.
You can go to consumer court at that time and seek whatever relief you want. It can also play a role. So, but RERA, I don't think so would help you much post possession, post registration of a unit.
Okay. So this is what you mentioned was more in terms of deficiency of service. What happens in case there is a structural defect, poor workmanship? We've seen recently, a building come down in Gurgaon. So in case there are these kind of issues, will those be handled by RERA, or even those will not?
If this structural deficiency, lack of services, if proven, RERA can maximum do is penalize the developer on a certain things, but relief to the buyer, a person who's already staying there, may not be specific, because it for the complete project. And RERA might say that for this you should go to consumer court.
Okay.
Might say.
All right. One follow-up question to this was also is that a lot of people have asked this question also to me, is that whilst RERA is now proactive compared to a consumer court or a consumer forum, RERA is taking action, they are issuing orders, but the fact is that there's no implementation of the orders. Developers are still not probably, heeding the final order that RERA appellate authority has issued. So what is the option available to buyers at that point of time?
So I will partially agree and partially disagree to this view, because as they say, there is no escape from law. So be it the developer, be it whosoever, there is no escape. RERA passes an order after looking into all the parameters which has been claimed by the investor, by the complainant, and the replies which has been filed by the respondent, as in the developer. RERA goes up to an extent of appointing a local commissioner for site survey. RERA goes to an extent of appointing an architect for remapping the unit, because there, if you remember, there are in the builder buyer agreement, there are option of that 5-10% increase and decrease in the area. developers end up charging you 30% increase in the area, in super area. So RERA clearly asked them, please bring us a certificate and show where this 30% has been increased. Correct. So I can go to that extent. So coming back, at this point, RERA helps you in understanding, in getting you relief as per what is written in your builder buyer agreement. That is how it is.
Okay. All right. And post the orders that are issued, how does one get it implemented in case?
Yes, the Act gives the authority of execution to the state in the Land Revenue Code. So as soon as the order is passed, that you need to wait for the developer to act on it. If the developer doesn't act, execution need to be filed before the RERA. And again, a notice is sent to the developer that we asked you to do so and so, which you have not done. Please explain why you have not done, or else we will issue a recovery certificate. Recovery certificate is always executed through the district magistrate or that particular district where the project is. As soon as it goes into the district administration, you and me both understand that how fast that forum works, and how the patwaris and the kanugo who have to actually execute it, how they work, and how these things are managed at that platform. But you don't have to be saddened by this fact that ab kya hoga wala situation should not be there, because if the district magistrate fails to execute your recovery certificate, you always have an option to go to the concerned High Court. There have been cases where such lack of action has been brought into knowledge of the Honorable High Court at Allahabad, and the Honorable Allahabad High Court has ordered to the district magistrate Gautam Buddha Nagar and Ghaziabad to act on the recovery certificates within a certain period of time, which is 3 months. And yes, the money has been refunded to the investor. So I would always recommend, if the money is, depending how big the money is for you, you should always approach High Court if there is delay in execution by the concerned district magistrate.
Thank you. So I think that definitely provides the next step, and I think the final step to getting your grievances redressed. Individually, do you think this is a good time for buyers to invest in real estate in India?
The market are better than what they were in last 2 years. There is certain price inflation that is happening. There various projects are being offered. As I said earlier, various lucrative offers are being made. My first advice to all the investors across the globe would be that do not fall into such traps. Do a proper, thorough research. If you have made a mind that yes, I have to put in my money, today is the time that you better invest in projects which are almost completed or which are completed for handover. Definitely, you may end up making small amount of gains, but at least your money is safe. If you are looking at a 5-year or 3-year timeline to pay the money over a period of next 3 years or next 4 years, then certainly you can consider an under construction property. But to choose an under construction property, please do a thorough research on the developer with whom you are putting your money.
Mr. Majumder, coming to you, what would your final words be? What would your advice be? Should buyers look at investing in Indian real estate markets?
So it all depends on, to what extent the buyer would like to take the risk. And everybody understands risk and return, they go hand in hand. So if you want to invest in a very risk-free manner, like taking a complete product which comes with a completion certificate from a very recognized seller, then please also appreciate the fact that the price has already matured. So therefore, then you should not expect much gain on that. And if you look at a risk-free return today, if you look at a government 10-year treasury bond yield, which hovers around 6%, 6.5%, or at best 7%, So if you buy a property and if that gives you a rental of 3 to 4%, then you can at best appreciate, you can at best expect the property to appreciate 1 or 2% in a year. If you are expecting more than that, then you are not following fundamental finance principles, because if there are gaps like this, then the market will correct quickly itself. So therefore, as an investor, if you think that I have $100, I'll not put entire $100 on this risky asset, but let me put $10 on this asset class where the risk appears to be high, but if it works well, this 10 can give me 20, 30, wherever otherwise my other option is, if I don't put this money here, I may lose this. So therefore, as they say, there is this fear of missing out as well.
Correct.
So my suggestion would be, first introspect, analyze your own profile, figure out how much of an investable surplus that you have, then decide your investment philosophy based on your risk profile. And then if you believe that a certain percentage, which may not be very significant for me, can be put into an asset class which appears to be risky, then do all the research, as Atulay was saying, to minimize your risk. When I took the example of a PE investor or a venture capitalist, they don't, on the basis of a 10-slide presentation, they don't put their money. They reject 100 presentation to select one particular startup. So adopt that methodology. Look at 100 projects, do your research, and then based on the information that you have gathered, and also talk to the experts, and then decide on 1 or 2 projects to put this money. But as a person with a bit of an understanding on finance, I would always encourage investors not to park all their money in risk-free returns, because that will be low at any point of time. Put some money on the asset class which appears to be risky but may give you very handsome, significant return if it is a well-researched and well-informed decision.
Great. I think that basically summed up the entire discussion that we've had and the focus of this particular webinar about whether India is a great opportunity to invest or not. I think both of you gentlemen have really pointed out what the pitfalls are, what are the things to be kept in mind. In fact, even at Magicbricks, we ourselves are now we've been releasing a lot of videos where we are doing project reviews, actually highlighting to developers buyers new launches that are coming in. What are the pros and cons of that particular project? How does it compare to competition? So it can help them in their research and in their process. It was great having you all on this panel. There was a lot of key takeaways from this entire discussion. And I'm sure that our viewers will feel likewise. Thank you very much, gentlemen.